This is Aner Dyfan teaches From the Depths Particle Accelerator Cannons, or PAC for short. So, what is the Particle Accelerator Cannon? The Particle Accelerator Cannon is quite an expensive block here, but it is a very potent energy weapon. What makes it different from the other energy weapon of lasers is that the particle accelerator draws its power directly from the battery bank and not from either engine power or ammunition itself. This does mean though that you need either an engine, RTGs or pistons or steam turbines to generate electricity for the battery bank in order for the particle accelerator to fire. Why would you want to be using a particle accelerator? Well, the particle accelerator cannon is an instant hit scan weapon much like the lasers. So if it can fire at a target, it will or can instantly hit it. And its accuracy is based on how far it's firing away. It is actually can be made very accurate to quite a long distance. The other benefit of the particle accelerator cannon is this wonderful array of sliders and such, which allow you to tune it to your own specifications, as well as changing the type of damage it does. So it can have a piercing shot, firing beams which can pierce through multiple layers of metal and heavy armour, an explosive shock, which is a single instant hit explosive, much like a hit scan cram cannon, should you want to imagine something as devastating as that, though it does take quite a lot of power to get up to that sort of level, but it is very fun and quite pretty. EMP, it is probably the singularly best EMP delivery system still, even though it has been weakened somewhat more recently, as it will instantly hit the target, spreading the EMP surge through the target quickly and efficiently, whereas, for example, cram have a high chance of missing, and missiles have the general weakness of a lot of counter to missiles, and other things like that. Impact is sort of the middle ground. It hits the front surface and then spreads a impact thump across the surface of a hull, but it ignores armour stacking, whereas the piercing and explosive shock do not. So, how do you build a particle accelerator cannon? Well, first of all, you place the single block. This is the main firing piece, and the beam comes out that dirty great big lens in the middle. You can place blocks all the way around this if you wish, and just leave that central one open and it will still be able to fire. Though, it does still leave the main firing piece quite exposed, whereas with other weapon systems you can hide it somewhat within the hull. In order to make the particle accelerator cannon, it is very simple. You need to create arms for it, and this is how you do that. So you just come up to one of these ports. There are 5 around the edge. Unfortunately, it is rotational symmetry and not a actual mirror symmetry, but that is reasonable. Rotational symmetry is generally very good for tetrising large systems together, though it isn't so good in From the Depths because we have no rotational symmetry shortcut. We just have the mirror line. Still, you'd select one of these arms and then place the blocks from here. Important to note is that all the particle accelerator tubing is directional, so you do have to make sure you have the trumpet and the pip the correct way around, because otherwise the gun will not be able to function. So if I placed this here, it looks like it's the same, but it is actually disconnected. So it's just something you do need to be aware of when building it. You think this is now actually functional, it seems, but it says it is a defective and dangerous pipe. What that means is that this, when it fires, the beam, rather than coming out the front, it will come out of the end of the dangerous pipe, like so. See, the beam comes out the back and then goes off into the distance. This is a very important thing to note with particle accelerators, because should you place some of the corner pipes like this and it gets damaged or shot up, it can end up shooting itself to pieces, which is a little bit of a problem, to be sure, because the most effective way in order to join all this system together is to loop it round and back on itself, rather than having straight line beams like this. But how do we stop it? Well, the easiest way is we use the Terminator tube. This adds another block to make it a length of 8, and then makes it a U-turn. So now when we fire, it fires the beam out of the front like we expect. In order to increase the potency of the weapon, we can actually add more arms. And what this does, this actually adds additional beams coming out of the front. So if I place another, not the lens, the Terminator tube like that, now when we fire, we actually have 2 beams coming out of the gun. You can just about see them split over in the distance there. So that is a very useful little feature. What you did see me do was accidentally place a lens down. And what this is, the particle accelerator lens, rather than firing out of the front, it fires out of these small lenses here. And the benefit of this is that it allows you to hide the vulnerable and very expensive primary part of the cannon away, and also each of these lenses fires 2 beams. But each of these beams is only half the strength of a U-turn block which would fire out of the front. Finally, there is an input port which, when you feed it back, the tube back into the system, like so, it will actually fire a much stronger beam out of the front, but I will show that shortly. What I have now done, I have built several particle accelerators in a slightly different configuration in order to show a little bit more about the 3 different styles of building them. An important thing to note with the input port particle accelerator is that the beam originates from here and it travels through here, and then it has to import back into the actual particle accelerator here. You may think because it will actually fit on the particle accelerator like that, it will function. It will not. It has to go the other orientation for it to then connect. You can see here it has a pipe length of 10 returning to accelerator. These all have length of 10 and are lensed pipe acting as a secondary firing piece, and then this is a U-turn. So what this one will do is this will fire 4 beams out of the main gun, each of which is a standard strength. This will fire 8 beams out of these smaller firing pieces here, each of which is half the strength of this one here, and then this one will fire 2 much stronger beams than either of the others, but it will only fire 2. Now, why would you want to have slightly different power settings for each of your beams? Well, it feeds back to the type of piercing, explosive, EMP, or impact. This is your general purpose particle accelerator. You just make it as large as you like, and then you have it dealing whatever damage you wish. I would generally say that impact or piercing would be the main choice to go for here, because you don't want to be having too strong a pierce that it over-penetrates the target. Speaking of, pierce is perfect for the multiple armed lens design, because each beam, if you make them strong enough, it will fire a lot of beams, and each one will do a small amount of damage but will maximize the amount of damage you deal on a target without over-penetrating. For the return to Accelerator, this is good for single very large damages, such as EMP or explosive shock, where you want to maximize as much damage as possible in a single hit. The explosive to make sure you do a huge blast of damage, and EMP so that you can ensure that the surge can pass through the craft and destroy the components you wish, and not just get lost on surge protectors. Let's just give you a quick show of what this actually looks like. So you can see here the energy use is 200 and does a damage of 500, and that will say it will fire 4. With the lenses it will do 200, each damage is 250. And then for here, for return to the pack, it will use 500 power per shot, but the damage is now 500. So it uses more power per shot, but it does a lot more damage. It isn't, unfortunately, it's not a linear relationship though. It actually uses a bit more power per shot for the amount of damage it gains. But the system is a lot smaller, so in a limited space, you want to be maybe using the return to Accelerator, whereas if you essentially had unlimited space, you might want to be using the normal U-turn or the lensed versions. Okay, so I have pulled up a target and just want to show what each one fires like. So we're going to fire the normal U-beam. You can see it fires several shots, all of which hit fairly precisely at the centre here, but not doing that much damage, which is to be expected because they are not that strong. If we do fire the other beams though, see here it fires a group of beams doing damage over a much larger area. This is again fairly important because it means that the damage is now spread over a larger area. And if we do overclock settings, so I'll show you if I just boost the power right up for this design over here. So for the U-bend, we fire, we completely annihilate 2 metal beams. Absolutely fantastic, which, to be honest, means that a lot of damage has been wasted. If we did now the same settings for the second one with the lenses, if we now aim and fire, you can see now we've gone through a lot more blocks because the amount of over-penetration is no longer as severe. Now moving over to the final one, if we do fire this, see both beams again come out of the main origin, and if I overclock this, it will be pretty much as expected and just again blast through 2 beams very effectively. Still, this is on piercing. If we go, say, for explosive shock, we can now start seeing where the differences occur on this maximum oversized system. So the big blast radius does a good amount of damage to a lot of blocks. For the multiple lensed version though, now go back to explosive shock, there's a lot of very small explosions spreading the damage over a very wide area, but actually not destroying anything, which is actually kind of important if you want to be destroying targets, you want to be blowing stuff up. And then the U-bend version is a similar task. It does, again, very similar damage to this variant over here, because it just does enough explosive damage in the beams that it fires. And we should now see a similar thing with the EMP. The EMP blast surges through and hits the weak components there. So yes, they're operating very similarly with the huge surge of EMP, but we're just seeing, because this is purely massive amounts of overclocking and charge, which is sort of going a bit overboard with everything. So just showing impact finally, we can see how it will strip off the outer layer of blocks, and then it spreads through and then damage some of the other components there as well. So it spreads out and doesn't seem to do as much damage as the explosive shock, but that is just because the damage is now being absorbed more heavily by the heavy armour in this particular target. I am sure though that you're wondering what all these numbers mean, so I'll just revert it back to its default settings, and we can see how everything adjusting. So you can adjust this, it changes the focus, but what does that mean? We can adjust the attenuation. What does that mean? And we can adjust the field of fire. This one is the easiest to explain. This is how much the firing piece itself can aim from center. I often have this very low, but you can have it all the way up to 30 degrees, because then it will fire up to a 30-degree angle in a nice big cone. Though towards the edge of that, it will be a bit more inaccurate, which is why I normally keep it fairly low, or as low as possible for the task I wish to provide it. We'll keep it at default for now. The efficiency and overclock is also quite similar. This will increase the damage linearly for an exponential growth in the power. So if we go to a 2, it will double the power but use 4 times the energy. And it also works in inverse. So if we went down to 1, we do 10% of the damage but only use 1/100th of the energy. You think this doesn't do much damage, but Do this on a very large system, maybe with input ports, and you can actually have an immensely efficient design which will use almost no power whatsoever. The problem being is that the initial cost of building the gun will be very expensive. I usually keep this around between about 1, so between about 0.8 and about 1.4, 1.5. I find that anything beyond those, you start either using a lot of power or not very much at all. And just not doing enough damage. Damage and inaccuracy. This increases the damage at the expense of the horizontal and vertical focus powers, and those are the important factors I will be explaining in a moment. And finally, the charge time. This is how much time it takes to fire between each shot. It defaults at 1 second, and it can go always down to 0.1. But, as you can see there, the horizontal focus does decrease. And so the longer you charge it for, the greater the focus. The damage and power used is linear. So, if it's 10, compared to 1 second, it's 10 times, and then all the way down to 0.1, it's a tenth. But this focus power is the important part of it here. So if I now fire this design, it's not shooting very far at all. And it's just making a complete mess of the accuracy. So we can see here that it's actually only accurate to 80 meters. Beyond that, and it just goes into a complete flail of missed shots. Which, to be honest, is very pretty, but useless in terms of trying to actually kill anything. Because also it only does 25 damage. Not much. So, we want to be having a nice big power focus. Because if we push it all the way up to 10 now, and then fire, we can see that the focusing is now much, much closer, and it's not until it's much further out that it starts to really divert. But, as you're wondering, is how much it diverts, and what this means. So, let's just do a nice systematic system. So we'll start with a perfectly accurate gun, 300 at 300, the minimum damage but the highest accuracy. We'll just see how far this then goes. So we'll fire it and observe where the beams begin to divert. So the first notification of any divergence happens around about 1200 meters. So that's around about that sort of distance there. But the beams are still very close together. Let us keep moving on out. We're now around about 3 kilometers, and the beams are beginning to noticeably spread apart from one another. Though this is still very accurate and would be able to hit most things with a high degree of accuracy even at this distance. In fact, all the way up to the maximum range of 5 kilometers, this gun will be able to basically hit pretty much anything with a good degree of accuracy, though now around about 5 kilometers I would say it's really only going to be hitting ship-sized targets with a reasonable degree of accuracy and good chance to hit something more vital. The other thing to notice is that the attenuation factor, that's just dealt by here, and that is the percentage of how much it loses per kilometer. So this will lose half its power per kilometer the beam travels. So by the time it gets out to 5 kilometers, even though it's really nice and accurate, it won't be doing much damage whatsoever. It'll be pretty much zero at that point. But now let's halve the power focus. So the damage, you can see the damage doubled, but the focus is now half of what it was. Let us fire the beam again. So this time, the first indication of any divergence is around about 600 meters. Half that what it was before. This indicates that the relationship is pretty linear in terms of the focusing power and where it begins to properly diverge. So in that case, we should find that around about 2.5 kilometers, we should be getting a decent divergence across the board and really be able to say that we could hit a ship-based target, yeah, around about the 2-3 kilometers. But even so, I would say that pushing it out much further, even to about 4 kilometers, we're actually still really rather accurate. And still, even out to the 5 kilometers, yes, we were going to take a few misses, but you're also instantly hitting a target 5 kilometers away. And so they can't really respond, because anything they do to fire at you, you have so much time to avoid the shell, and they just can't predict it, whereas you have hit them and started to deal the damage straight away. Let's just change the damage again, just doubling again the damage, and then halving the focusing. So now we should expect, if it is a more linear relationship, that the beams begin to diverge around about the 300 meter mark. The beams are beginning to diverge, and we are around about the 300-400 meter mark. So the relationship seems pretty linear. There is always a little bit of oddity and divergence around with this system, so it isn't perfect, but it is a good thumb rule. So let's now observe the maximum range. So we're now around about 2.5 kilometers, and the beams are now getting pretty rarefied, and I'd say this is about the limit of it being able to consistently hit targets, probably around about the 3 kilometer range. And you really want something a little bit closer, between the 2 and 3 kilometers, before you can really say that you're taking good hits on the target. So now the damage is increased even further, and also the horizontal focusing power and vertical power has halved once more. So now we should be getting a lot less accurate shots and a lot more divergence early on, because we should really now see the beginnings of divergence around about 200 meters, which is exactly correct. Now pushing out further, you can see we're still getting a good pattern of beams all the way up to around about the 1 kilometer mark. And this would mean that it would be good for more of a close-in system for taking out planes, but its ship capabilities are much more limited in terms of its range. A lot better than the fighter, but we're now really looking around about up to about 2 kilometers. Beyond that, and again the beams, they're fairly okay, but you wouldn't really want to be utilizing a very strong beam beyond this, because otherwise you could end up wasting a lot of power on missed shots. Going even further and doubling again, halving the focusing power even more, we should now be seeing a real limit in the range of this system. So now we should be starting to see divergence within around about the 100 meters. And here we go, we have divergence just shy of 200 meters, but we are now getting divergence, and the beams are beginning to spread out very rapidly. We aren't even really at a kilometer, and I wouldn't really want to trust this to be an anti-air system against a plane coming in at a kilometer. Even moving out about 1.5 kilometers, the beams are getting much more rare, and hitting even a ship-sized target at that range is going to be much more limiting. And so if we do max it all the way out to the 15, we'll find that actually the beams do diverge pretty soon, as to be expected. What does this mean to you? Now, I would recommend a accuracy of around about 25 for a more close-in range system. I'll show you why. So this is accuracy of 25. Now the reason I selected this one, focusing power of 25, is, you see on this point, this is the 1 kilometer mark. We're going to be scoring good, strong hits against large flyers, but if we go a little bit further, out to around about the 1.5 to 2 kilometers, the beams are reasonable in terms of being able to hit a large ship target. Still not perfect, but we would be getting a reasonable number of strikes. The other one I would probably recommend is in the other direction. If we're going more for a heavy anti-air build, and this would be going for more for the focusing power of around about 50. Now the reason for this is that if with a focusing power of 50 we get a very nice grouping of beams all the way out well past 1 kilometer. So 1 kilometer we can be almost guaranteed a instant hit, and then pushing out to about 1.5 to 2 kilometers, the majority of the beams are still in a nice tight grouping, a couple of outliers there, but they should provide a good hit ratio against flyers. And so this is the setting I like to use when utilizing them for anti-air duties using a strong EMP blast. And so the final part is to what does this horizontal and vertical focus do? Well, what this does, this essentially pushes the weighting of the beams towards the horizontal or the vertical, remembering that the focus is better as it is higher. So if we go for a full vertical focus, this means is that the beam is going to spread out more along the horizontal, which is actually really good for anti-shipping. So if I fire it there, you can see that the beams, well actually it's a little bit difficult to tell, but see the beams are now flat. So although they're diverging quite quickly, you can see the beams are very flat. So against most ships, if you're firing them on their broadside or alongside there, it's still going to be hitting them. And that's going to be hitting them much further out. So although we have quite a big divergence, it looks from above, which it, to be honest, is. If you placed a ship along here, it could be hit in multiple locations by this array of beams. So it's another way to improve your particle accelerator against certain targets, though for the most part I like to be using particle accelerators against fast air targets where the hit scan nature really helps against them. And in that case I don't feel that the vertical focusing really helps, because if I push it a little bit further so you can just see a little bit more what it's like when you focus in this direction. Although it's nicely accurate here, it's not going to be necessarily hitting a plane, because unless the plane is straight up, but then again you might as well have it with the no focusing adjustments. So this is more useful, I find, against shipping rather than anything else in the air. So finally, I just want to show you one of the particle accelerators I like to be utilising, and that is a ball turret using the particle accelerator. And the reason for a ball turret is that it allows me to have a full range of movement against flyers. And this is what I have as an EMP weapon. I find this is very useful as it is able to shoot pretty much anything with ease. I know that not many people find the flying squirrel particularly dangerous, but for a lot of people it can be quite a difficult target. So we'll just show how it does against the flying squirrel. Just quickly fires, and then the EMP blast fires just through there, though it did actually just get killed by its own missiles. So we'll just try that again. So the EMP blast fires, though again the lambs actually destroyed it. I'm going to destroy the lambs on this vehicle. It's preventing me from showcasing what I mean. Let's try again. The particle accelerator did miss there, but it's having difficulty actually aiming at the squirrel, just because I haven't got very good detection systems on this system. There we go, the second shot fires and AI deads it instantaneously. And against a lot of systems, this would actually have difficulty trying to aim at the target. And again, it lands a good EMP strike straight on target, just showing how well it can be used as a hit scan anti-air weapon against those irritating, fast moving or very erratic moving targets. However, that is it for today's tutorial on the Particle Accelerator Cannon, or PAC, by myself and Dyfan. I do hope you enjoyed it and found this video very informative. But until next time, goodbye.